prosecution is resting in the case of George Zimmerman and his trial for the murder, or at the very least killing, of Trayvon Martin. We've got some details there, and then I want to talk a little bit more generally about the case, which I've been paying some attention to. So, as I said, the prosecution is resting. The defense tried to have the charges against Zimmerman dropped. I guess that's standard operating procedure. It seems pretty ridiculous at this point. But the defense attorney for George Zimmerman, Mark O'Mara, said that there was an enormous amount of evidence that had been presented that showed that Zimmerman had acted in self-defense. And he argued that Zimmerman at the time had a reasonable belief that he was in danger and that he acted without the ill will, hatred, and spite that would be necessary to prove the second-degree murder charge that the prosecution is trying to pin to Zimmerman. The prosecutor, Richard Manti, countered with, there are two people involved here. One of them is dead, and one of them is a liar. That seems, based on the evidence I've seen, to be pretty true. Now, that's basically what happened. And if you've been watching the trial at all, the strategy that they've taken is to discredit all of the witnesses that have tried to corroborate the case of, or the point of view of Trayvon Martin's family and what they said happened. There was absolutely shameless attacks on the female friend of his, with apparently the argument being that if you can prove that she's racist, if you can prove that she's illiterate, it wasn't murder. I don't know how that works, but the justice system in America is so perverted that that's the route that the defense took. And since then, we've seen medical examiners, some of the people who examined Zimmerman after the trial, or after the killing. And so some of that information has been very interesting. Now, I have not been following the case day to day. I haven't been watching the ridiculous HLN or CNN daily hour news coverage of the event, but I have been following some of the headlines. And what's interesting to me is that the prosecution is resting, and many people are saying, oh, they clearly didn't prove that this wasn't self-defense. But all of the evidence I've been seeing would seem to indicate that it definitely was not self-defense. And so I kind of feel like I went to sleep and woke up in bizarro Earth or something like that. To me, the most important data, outside of what we've known the entire time, like that he went out investigating and searching and following Trayvon Martin, that he called the police said stop following him, and he continued to, that seems incredibly questionable. But apparently that just doesn't matter, not relevant, has nothing to do with the case, since I don't hear it talked about at all at this point. It's all, was he called a cracker? That seems relevant, I suppose. That's the case that the defense is making. But we do know at this point there was no indication of Trayvon Martin's DNA on the gun. There was no indication of Zimmerman's DNA underneath his fingernails, Trayvon Martin's fingernails, that would seem to indicate that he was fighting fiercely. The medical examiner said that the injuries to Zimmerman were insignificant, that they were superficial, which goes against what we had heard when they months ago released the picture of him all bloodied and trying to make the case look obviously he was being attacked viciously. And yet, with all of this evidence, we're supposed to believe that it was still self-defense. Look, I have problems both with this individual case and problems with the way that we cover murder trials in America. I think that apparently the country has soured somewhat on reality TV, and now we want it to be even more real. And so we engage in this. At any given time, we choose one trial. It becomes basically courtroom porn, and we follow every single step of the way, getting into the personal lives of every witness and that sort of thing. Now, I understand that there's big money in it. I don't just blame HLN. I don't just blame CNN. Hundreds of thousands of people are watching their completely unnecessary daily hour-long coverage of the trials. And so they have a monetary incentive to continue covering it the way that they have. But it does bother me that America is just gobbling this up the way that they are. But specifically in regards to the trial, I think that self-defense is supposed to mean something. And this trial is teaching me that it apparently in America does not mean anything, especially if you're holding a gun. There will, of course, be multiple days, if not weeks, of the defense presenting their case. The prosecution had their try. I think they presented a pretty compelling case that this wasn't self-defense, but we're going to have to see what the jury thinks at this point. So anyway, I think that both on the media end of this, what it says about the American people, and also what it says about the jury and how they seem to be unconvinced by what the prosecution has presented up until this case, up until this point, it's all bad news.